1st, 2022. Melissa, can we do a roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Conroy,
Here.
Commissioner Justy,
Yes.
Commissioner Castle,
Here.
Chair Marin,
Here.
Commissioner Woodham,
Here.
Commissioner Solomon,
Here.
and for the record, absent tonight is Commissioner Samples.
Great. Let's take a moment to salute the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item D, approve the order of agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item E, blue folder items. Are there any blue folder items this evening? No.
I believe there are no blue folder items this evening.
Then move on to item F, consent calendar. Does anyone have any comments or want to remove anything from the consent calendar this evening? Then can we go ahead and get a motion to approve the minutes from November 10th and December 8th, as well as this evening's consent calendar?
I move that we approve them.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Let's see, item G, there's no excluded consent calendar items. Item H, public participation. Doesn't look like there's anyone here this evening. Are there any e-comments or anyone online on Zoom?
No one on Zoom and no e-comments tonight.
Great. Then there are, item I, doesn't appear to be any continued items from previous agendas. So we'll move on to J1. Open up the discussion and recommendation to the City Council regarding assignments of the general fund balance for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to see you again. As I mentioned at our last get-together, we have been working diligently to try to produce our annual comprehensive financial report, and we have been fairly significantly delayed by the GASB 87 requirement that now forces us to incorporate leases and leased assets as part of our year-end financial totals. Turns out I may have underreported how many agencies are suffering from delays. The last time we talked, I had heard it was roughly a third. I'm now hearing it's more like 50+% of cities have been delayed in the production of their annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR as we call it. So we're not alone. Our auditor is struggling and working to get through all of our various lease documents. I think I mentioned previously about 150 of those leases are germane to the new GASB standard. So while they've been diligently at work, Lori Yamasaka, our acting finance director, Marnie Ruland, our former finance director who's come back to help us out in our time of need, have been scrubbing the books and working through our year-end financials and have ultimately produced the document you have before you today. And really, the action that you seek as a precursor to our ACFR production is the determination to, as it pertains to any unallocated and leftover unfunded general fund balance. So, and the good news is the number this year is slightly higher than we had estimated it to be when we adopted the budget. That makes this discussion much easier. There are still a lot of unique anomalies as I look at the variance reports and some of the attachments to this item that I think you'll find curious. This was a very unique year with our annual financial report, in part really for two, I think, fundamental reasons. One, we were coming off of COVID. So the prior year numbers were quite a bit reduced from an annual sort of revenue standpoint, whether it be transient occupancy tax, sales tax, et cetera. There was quite a few variances and adjustments that occurred at the tail end of the 2021 fiscal year versus going into the 21-22 fiscal year, which we are discussing tonight, which, for those who may not know, ended last June 30 of this previous summer in 2022. So when you look at year-over-year comparisons, the comparative analysis in this document from 2021 actuals to 21-22 actuals, there are significant swings. So COVID was one factor there. The other one, as this body will know, was our pension obligation bond, our pension refinancing. And the reason that was significant in our accounting is in historic years, our unfunded accrued liability that we owed to PERS was accounted for and allocated as a personnel expense in each of our operating departments. So the fire department, the police department, the city manager's office, our UAL, our total city UAL, which was roughly 15 million a year at the time, a little bit more than that, was allocated by department based on personnel expense on a per capita basis. In 21-22, we took all of that out of the adopted budget because we knew we would be issuing the bond and we wouldn't have an annualized UAL payment. We would have a singular UAL payment that was made to PERS. So what it shows is a temporary and artificial reduction in personnel costs that if you looked at those 2 years in isolation, you'd say, oh, wow, what did the city do to reduce all of these expenses? Well, we didn't really do much. We just moved it from one line item to something else that's not fully captured in the budget because as you will recall, the council, we didn't make the first full, we haven't yet made the first full bond payment. We made a partial interest-only payment last year that was roughly a little under $6 million, as opposed to what will be our annualized recurring fixed payment of roughly $13 million in this current fiscal year, 22-23 and beyond for the next roughly 28 years. So we have this blip.
Real quick. Where will those payments be coded? The same place as the UAL or a whole different line item?
It's going to be close. Almost. It's not going to be an above the line personnel expense like you would see benefits like base salary, insurance, other benefits, compensated absences, et cetera. You wouldn't see it there like we did before. UAL would be a line item in the department's personnel expense. It's going to be associated with personnel, but it's going to be a standalone character that's going to say, police department share of annual pension obligation. I don't know if it will be that descriptive, but theoretically, you're going to see an isolated line item in the department's operating budget that is our best estimate as it pertains to that department's fair share of that charge, almost like we would in ISF.
That was my question. Is that going to change the way we're booking ISF in all those departments also?
It shouldn't because ISS will be specific to the personnel today because now this is kind of a static artificial figure that's based on that department's, we're using the OPEB analysis that we had at the time of the pension issuance, and it'll remain fixed from that point forward. Now, personnel could adjust in future years in different operating departments and therefore adjust future year internal service fund charges, but the actual pension obligation allocation should remain fixed by each department, almost based on that moment in time calculation. Because it really was for arguably people in the city at that moment and prior, not really for future. So you'll see that more structurally when we present to you the published adopted budget book for 22-23. You'll see it in there as a standalone character, but it will be allocated by department out of fairness, so we have a sense of the department's fully loaded cost.
With the same allocation approach method.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then for coming years, we're going to have UAL again, be it smaller comparatively, but we will have it again. So have you put thought into that as far as will the UAL be shown, say, next to the interest so we have an idea of total
Probably
costs?
will, although how we book UAL, I guess it'll depend on if the auditors give us that flexibility. I'd certainly like to do that. It would make sense for us to track it that way. That would be our preference. But sometimes that UAL was booked a little bit differently previously. So it may end up going above the line and be part of the personnel expense again. I hope not. I would rather it be its own part of that character, candidly, because it is technically a pension, cost. Assuming the auditors give us the green light to do that, that's how we'll post it. But we won't see that in practice until 24-25.
Sorry, real quick, just to finish my point. Yeah. I would agree with you, and I would just say the easier it is for us to add up the pieces to come up with total personnel, the better.
100%. There's no question it'll be assigned to the department in some form of personnel category, either in that standalone character that we're now creating, or it'll be part of the personal expenses as an object code. So we'll be able to track it one way or the other. The question is, how clear will that come across? And I like your idea as the preferred method.
Thank you.
So I mention all this, and we'll be able to answer any questions you have, but I mention all this to say that it's a different, when you look at these comparative charts, the variance analysis that this commission, rolls up its sleeves and looks at a lot. This is a goofy year. It's a year that kind of does this, and it's not very helpful. The variance, as I looked at them and know that they're still in draft form, we're going to tighten these up, and I'd love to hear your input on anything that looks like it's not been well explained, or looks like it's missing, or questions that you don't see answered in the variance detail. Certainly all ears on that. But it's a very goofy year because of that elimination of that significant portion of the budget that was UAL in the prior full completed fiscal year, and then this odd year where we really didn't make a payment, or a partial payment rather, because we were taking advantage of the bond proceeds. And then secondarily, what makes it goofy, especially on the revenue side, are the ARPA funds that we received, the reinvestment, the COVID recovery monies that we received from the federal government. We got both bookings in the 21-22 fiscal year. We were supposed to get, you'll recall this, we were supposed to get one of the tranches, the first 3.4 million in 2021. It got delayed. It didn't hit until like August of 2021. And then we got the second 3.4 million in the spring, late May, early June of 2022. So we got both of those as single year deposits in that fiscal year. So it's a goofy year where revenues look really high because we got these good one-time funds to kind of prop us up, and expenses are really low because of the artificial reduction of the UAL payment. So it looks like this banner year, but structurally it isn't. It's a bit of a facade in that respect. So don't. As I say that, it's difficult to pull out of their structural deficit. It's difficult to pull out of their core revenue versus core expenditure, and so it's an odd variance year.
Hey, Mike, quick question on UAL before I forget it and before we move on. In the UAL file, do you all have a record of how that? We refinanced $215 million, so that the city had gotten into debt with CalPERS to the tune of $215 million. I don't know how many years that was over.
Since the history of basically the longest living retiree from that person's start of their career until today.
Okay, but I assume that we've got a record somewhere by year, by the end of each fiscal year, what that UAL was.
Yep.
It would be good if, I have not seen that. I've seen a total. Yeah. But it would be good for this commission to have in our files, because we're going to be revisiting that as we go. Some years we're going to add to it, some years it's going to come off.
We could do that for you. It would be aggregating many, many years of annual PERS circulars that we receive that basically provide, it's our annual CalPERS statement.
Yeah.
And it will show you, and of course it adjusts too, as we heard from the gentleman that was here at our prior meeting. There are factors, policy changes that affect it and the like, but what you get each year is a statement of what and how CalPERS is calculated, our UAL, based on current events. So it's a kind of an ugly number over time, but it was as much as the 200 and whatever it was, 22 million or whatever we finished up before we actually paid it all off last year. So it's there, the history's there, and it shows really where we were at and what our future UAL payment structure was going to look like had we not taken the action that we did. And it was going to be much worse, you'll recall, than $15 million a year. I mean, at the peak of that 20-year repayment cycle, our number was as much as 28 million, as I recall.
Yeah.
I mean, there was going to be some rough fiscal years ahead of us had we not done what we did. And as I've mentioned here before, we're going to save the city over $100 million over the life of the bond, which is, big money. So, but we could do that. We could do that for you. And, the reasons for that debt, what makes that debt unique is that PERS treats it as if they should have it, as you know, right? They say, okay, the city, as it stands today, if the doors closed at City Hall you owe us $200 million to make good on all of your future pension costs, right? $220 million. Of course, that was never going to happen, but that's the way they view the world. Well, for every day we don't have that $220 in our coffers to be invested, we're going to charge you 7%. I mean, it was the discount, right? The 7%
Whatever
discount.
the actual assumption is, that
Yeah.
they're charging that rate.
Right.
So
And-
we were paying closer to 8%.
There was a
10
time.
years ago.
Yeah, there
because-
was a time when that discount rate was 7.5, 7.75, when they were really humming. That's since been lowered, which is good, but they were charging us that. And if we didn't have that money in there and they had a shortfall, they would charge us the delta between what was lost in that investment as well. So it was a lose-lose, and the reason the refinancing was so helpful is that we fixed our debt at 2.8% rather than having to suffer through CalPERS's discount rate. Anyway, that will help us obviously long-term. So all of that's my preamble to tell you that the brass tacks good news with this year's year end. When we adopted the budget, we anticipated we'd have net proceeds past our normal obligations, right? Where we have our general fund balance, and you see it in our staff report, all the flow throughs. We've got to take out the 8.33% contingency reserve. We've got to take out our normal compensated absences calculation. We've got to take out our traditional encumbrances for open purchase orders that are ongoing for projects that are continuing. We've got to take out our traditional CIP appropriations that are lingering. We've got to take out our traditional transfers for or carryovers for projects that were budgeted and priorities to council in the prior fiscal year that we didn't get to because of staffing issues or just the fact that we had a sheer volume of things. You've got to take out the CalPERS reserve fund. I struggle with this. I have asked staff many times, why can't we just have this be set aside as a separate standalone savings account that doesn't flow through the general fund? And it's an auditing obligation. It has to continue to be booked as a general fund expense, and it has to be accounted for through the fund balance calculation. And the reason I've asked to make sure that we put it into this flow through is so we never forget about it, right? The reserve fund is part of that starting general fund balance, just like the contingency reserve is. It's not a standalone account. We could eventually set up, I believe, separate funds and have those transferred out to be part of it. The challenge, of course, is you transfer it out, you incur time and delay in the event that you actually need to have some cushion and float in your annual expenditures and revenues. So that's part of that. And then, of course, the big drawdown on that amount of money is the money that the council used when we adopted the 22-23 fiscal year budget to balance and then to do some things, right? Capital projects, some other allocations we wouldn't normally have made if it wasn't for this unique year where we had the extra ARPA funds and we had the extra net proceeds from the pension refinancing. So there was an $8.5 million pre-draw on this year-end fund balance that was made back in June with the council anticipating these savings coming. So after all of that, when we adopted the budget, we thought we'd have a little under $2 million to talk about at this time of year. We actually had a little bit more than that. We ended up finishing at about $4.2 million. So we got a little extra to allocate, which is great news. Would have loved to see more, but it was good news. And given all the challenges through the budget process and mid-year and everything else that we suffered, when all the debits and credits were itemized, we came out about $2.2 million higher than anticipated. The real primary reason for that, we experienced the traditional savings we typically do with personnel vacancies, turnover, and the like. You see that in the reports. Those weren't very uncommon. We did perform, and I've forecast this for you for a while. We performed a little bit better under property tax. That continues to be a strong point for us. I think we have since recalibrated the property tax revenue anticipation in this fiscal year budget, so I don't see a whole bunch more upside there going into 23-24 as an example. But that continues to be strong. Sales tax performed at a higher level than we anticipated last fiscal year. I think we have recalibrated that as in the budget as well, so I don't see a whole bunch of upside or growth for us going into the next fiscal year. TOT, we kept fairly conservative. It slightly outpaced our mid-year adjustments, but not by much. I do see us once Marine Avenue Hotels, we've talked about this come back online, and we have paid off that authority-funded reserve. That $3 million will start to accrue back to the general fund next fiscal year. I feel good about that. But that's still artificially low in the budget right now, and it performed last fiscal year at year end at about what we expected. So UUT actually was a bright spot, a little higher than we anticipated. I think largely just due to people being home more often, turning the lights on longer during the day, running utilities, just due to the remote work reality that sort of set in, particularly during 21, 22, that period of time. So, there isn't anything in there that's a real wow, it's oh my goodness, I can't believe we got to 4.2 million. It feels like kind of just a general build on where we were. All the crazy stuff and the mechanics of the bond and everything else, sort of fell out the way we thought they would generally. The bookings and all of that, there was some finishing work on that when it's all said and done. But the bottom line, really for this group is we finished at 4.2 rather than the sort of anticipated 2. And I've got a couple recommendations as to how I'd like to spend that money or set that money aside rather. We have in our suggestions to council, we're going to recommend the $1 million traditional transfer to the capital projects fund every year at year end. We take whatever savings we have, assuming we have it. Most years we've had it. We transfer it and set it aside in the capital project, the 300 fund we call it, for appropriation as part of the next year's capital budget. So that money sits there, and then in May, it's the money we draw from to make recommendations for general funded capital projects, whether it be parks or facilities or other things. You see those recommendations from us as we talk going into the budget preparation. So that $1 million would set aside and be waiting for us when we go through the work next year, next year in like 3 months. And then we've got $160,000 that we need to cover election costs this year. We're going to have not one, but two elections in the 22-23 fiscal year. So we need a little bit more money to cover that, particularly the special election that occurred in October. We also have some money we're carrying over from last fiscal year in the clerk's budget to help cover those costs. But we do need an additional 160 to cover it. And then from there, that leaves us with about $3 million. And my recommendation is to move all of that, and you heard me signal this to you at our last meeting, to move all of that into a retitled CalPERS reserve fund. So we have about $5 million in the CalPERS reserve fund. We've had it there for a while. My recommendation is to put the $3 million with that $5 million, get us just about the 8, and retitle that, not just CalPERS reserve fund, because we're sort of moving away from that, but really the employee compensation, I forget, we've got an artful title in here, employee compensation benefit and pension reserve fund. So a little broader title. And the reason for that, and I've explained this to you, is we're going to need to invest in our employee groups over the next couple of years. And I'm not sure in all instances that we're going to have structural revenue to assign to those investments early on. And I'd like to use this as a bit of a bridge fund, much like we did when we first started the CalPERS pension fund. We would kind of, it was a bit of a revolving door, and I'm hopeful it's not overly revolved, but it was a bit of a revolving door. It was a set aside account that would allow us to kind of bridge projects or costs that might take a couple of years to structuralize. So this $8 million, assuming the council would be supportive of this, and hopefully you all see the reasoning behind it as well, would be to allow us to have a bit of a piggy bank to cover those shortfalls that might not be there in the structural budget as we go through adoption each and every year for the next couple of years. So
is any part of that CalPERS balance formulaic, or is it just as much as this is as much as we've been able to get put together and put into that fund?
Yeah, it's the latter. Yeah, not tied to any, it's not indexed to any specific performance metric. It's just really when we've had money, stuck it in there as a kind of a set aside. And I do anticipate us using that fund to cover, ideally in full, whatever that supplemental UAL will be in 24-25. In an ideal world, we're able to pay that off in one payment and not amortize that.
That'd be great.
So, that's in part the goal, but I don't want it to be set aside just for that purpose. I'd like to have some flexibility to help bring us to market with our employee groups. You heard my plea a little bit, when we got together last. We're just about to finalize the class and comp study. I actually had a meeting at 5 o'clock today with our consultant. We do pretty well on the benefit side of things. But even with benefits, we're in some instances, we're woefully below market, but on average, we're almost 10% below market across the board, fully loaded. So that's not a good place to be if you want to be a desirable employer. So we have work to do there. We're not going to get there all in one fell swoop. We can't afford a 10% raise across the board. We just don't have the funds for it. But we can, I think, make adjustments to compensation and structure through a schedule over time to try to bring us back to market, and do that over time. And I see this account as helping bridge that gap. So when I propose a budget in May that says we've got $110 million of structural revenue, but we've got $112 million of structural expenditure, and I want to balance the budget using $2 million from this account, that's the kind of idea that I'm thinking would be helpful here going forward. Just take a little bit of the air out of the balloon, give us a little bit of a kind of a relief valve as we come back online structurally. Because we do have some additional structural revenues that will appear over time. The Legato project, once the Palos Verdes Inn is online and those units are here, we'll see increased revenues. Theoretically, when we get to issuing cannabis permits in town, we'll see increased revenues. If ultimately the council, as it evaluates the VRBO consideration and short-term rentals, as I mentioned in the budget message, potentially could generate additional ongoing structural revenue. The Marine Avenue Hotel site, when that comes back online, will generate $3+ million of ongoing structural revenue. So we have the Galleria, the South Bay Social District. Theoretically, when they're built, we should see tax increment there. So there are some very, not just hopeful, but probable tax increment scenarios for us in the next few years, but they're not going to all be here when we propose the 23-24 fiscal year budget. So this, to me, provides a bit of that relief on a short-term basis. Yes, sir.
Do the online purchases generate any sales tax revenue?
So the way that works is anything you buy online, whether it's here or in Palos Verdes or in Beverly Hills, that money is captured in a county pool, county sales tax pool. And what's ironic is you would think, okay, well, all of the folks up here who clicked under a 90277 zip and bought whatever they bought, okay, well, they get all the sales tax from those purchases. It doesn't work that way. What happens is it goes in the pool, and then the pool is allocated to each entity based on its performance of brick and mortar properties. So when you have, and this works, so for some cities, this is a boondoggle. This is to your advantage because you outperform your peers with brick and mortar. For some cities like Palos Verdes or Rolling Hills, where you're predominantly a residential community, this is a terrible formula for you because your residents might buy a whole bunch of stuff online, but your city has no brick and mortar retail. So therefore you see a disproportionately low percentage of that sales tax pool. We, unfortunately, used to benefit from this formula when the South Bay Galleria was performing at a high level, and we had some significant big box in the community. We no longer do. We perform below the median now on a brick and mortar basis, so we don't receive our fair share. I'd like to see that change if the South Bay Social District performs as it should, and some of our other properties do well. I think we'll get back to at least obtaining what we should, perhaps even outpacing it a little bit. But it's an oddity. Folks would think, with today's technology, you should just see all that money accrue right back to the point of sale. They don't really have the technology to quite capture it that way.
How much of a hit are we taking?
Oh, it's definitely in the millions, for sure. Yeah, I don't know
Nordstrom's
exactly.
left to really put us behind the 8 ball there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time the Galleria, in the Galleria's heyday, it generated like $6 million a year in sales tax, something like that. I mean, citywide now, we're at 11, under 11. So, and now they're down to, less than, probably 1.5, 2.
The Galleria. Well, because they're all but shuttered at this point.
Yeah.
But I mean, all shopping centers are down considerably, just.
They are.
People buy online now. It seems interesting they couldn't tie it to the zip code. It seems.
It's an odd thing.
people
There's been people pushing for that, trying to change that. It did take a bit of and there's been other pushes too. People that have distribution centers, for delivery are saying, hey, we want all of that because we take the impact, right? You're running all those trucks through our city. We should. So now there's kind of some different franchise activity going on. If you have a certified, distribution site, places like Moreno Valley or, some of these other inland communities have been pushing for that
How
for
do
a
they
while.
characterize endpoint of that item? So if there's an Amazon drop box at the Whole Foods is maybe not considered a brick and mortar. Traditional brick and mortar retailer, it's characterized as a grocer. But
That would contribute to our total pool. I mean, anybody that generates, now some things are exempt at grocery stores, but anything that would be eligible for sales tax, that would accrue to our total sales tax figure, which would help our pro rata share of the online sale. But the delivery to a site, I think, at this point, it's immaterial. It doesn't matter where it gets delivered to. And that's part of the other problem I think they have is that's the counter argument to point of sale. Okay, my computer location is here. I'm assigned, maybe even your phone, right? I'm assigned to my zip code, and I buy my item, and online it looks like I'm buying it in the city of New York because I'm traveling. Well, that's not really. You didn't buy it for that location. You bought it for your home and and wherever that might be. So. It seems like the state could do better here and be a little more more accurate, but
Where it is shipped should count, and we only have 2 zip codes, so I don't see why it is. that
we
big.
share a zip code with the city of Torrance. So, then that gets a little more complicated too. And then they got to do geofencing around the dividing line between, the 90277 Torrance and 90277 Redondo Beach. So
Put up for property tax.
you could use that as a different metric. But then of course, there's just a lot of
Yeah.
variables there. So, I mean,
A lot of interesting
I think
parties.
I couldn't agree more that it seems like there's a more accurate way to do it. It hasn't happened yet.
want more car dealerships.
Exactly. So if you want to play the game, right? You appreciate brick and mortar sale because it actually you don't just get that, you get your extra percentage of county pool. Restaurants contribute, by the way. Restaurants are some of our biggest contributors to sales tax now. They're some of our highest performers. Shop local, eat local, all those things help. That's been true since the dawn of time.
Just out of curiosity, outside of the Galleria, what are our largest sales tax payers?
Del Amo Motorsports is a big one for us. If you've been in there, they do they do an incredible job. Big money consistently over time. Total Wine, sadly.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
sounds like
Was a real big performer during COVID. Living Spaces is another one. We used to have Teak Warehouse was big in town. They've relocated their retail spot to a degree, so that was.
Nice getting the dealership back on the corner
Yeah.
of PCH and
It's the Mitsubishi
190th.
dealership is helpful. We are now sharing some of those proceeds with
Hermosa.
Hermosa out of fairness, but they are coming back online. I think they're starting to perform a little bit better. They're fully inventoried now. They
We
weren't-
get the service center and they get the car sales.
No, we just did geographic split. So I think like 60% of the properties in Redondo, 40% is there. So total sales split by geography. That's the way we did the sales tax sharing agreement.
Okay, that's a good deal.
Fair, yeah. So those are a couple of our big ones. But yeah, our grocers are big. Our grocers are a big contributor. Our restaurants are big. Cheesecake Factory is in our top 15 or top whatever it is.
Chugging away for years.
They have. You'd be surprised.
What about the hotels? I know we get TOT, but what about on their restaurants?
Just like any other restaurant,
Yeah.
some of them perform pretty well. The standalone restaurants tend to be, that do significant volume at price do pretty well. On a per square foot base, we've got some steakhouses in town that perform really well.
What about the old Ruby's location?
It's under a
That's
new
being
lease.
leased. That will be repurposed here soon.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got
With On the Rocks.
Same
Oh,
and
really?
On the Rocks,
How
yeah.
funny.
We've got a TA on both of those, but the lease documents aren't executed yet, but they hopefully will be prepared and executed soon. So yeah, to answer your question though, it's one of those rare, you would think you buy something online, okay, it's going to go to that, again, it's going to go to my city because I bought it for my home address. Doesn't work that way, sadly.
I had a couple points.
I have a few questions. Go ahead.
Okay. I like everything you said. I particularly like the idea of setting aside a good portion of what I'll call surplus for essentially looks like future UAL
Yeah.
payments. I think that's such a good idea. In fact, I would love to see something like that memorialized or committed to either by city council or city staff to say that we're going to make a commitment to put any surplus towards that so that we don't get this snowball effect again, right? And find ourselves potentially in the same situation we were in before. You mentioned that you also want to put some of those funds now and in the future towards, let's call it compensation. And part of that is getting I'll call it budgeted compensation packages for positions, staff positions, consistent with market. As I'm sure you're well aware, there's also this one-upsmanship where it's like, they're paying more for this position than we are at the next city over. So if we want to get those people instead of them, now we need to pay more than them. And then they look at us and then it's this
Yeah, kind of a
ratchet
stacking
effect.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you point blank.
Yeah.
Are you currently having any trouble filling open positions at the city because our budgeted compensation packages are so below market?
Yes, significantly so. Yes. And that's in part why it's so important. And it's a very difficult challenge to recruit right now. I think we're not the only ones suffering from that. You might have noticed the city of Torrance had a special session of the council in closed session to talk about, attraction, recruitment, retention, benefit programs, because they're suffering much more severely than we are, because a lot goes into hiring, right? I mean, it's not always about base pay. It's not always about benefits. A lot of times it's about the culture. It's about the quality of life in the organization. It's about the people. We do pretty well retaining people once they come to Redondo, but I'll give you a great example, and I've got some good news to share. Our finance director recruitment, last go round, had a hell of a time getting qualified applicants. Did a little bit better this time, in part because I went back to council and asked them to adjust the compensation so we could be a little more attractive on paper. You'll be pleased to hear that I extended a conditional offer to a finalist last week, and she accepted and is going through the background process. And if all goes well, she'll be starting on February 27th. So really, really pleased with that. But and what I noticed is that particular application came in shortly after we rebooted the flyer with the adjusted compensation schedule. And, it's an isolated example, but I can tell you across the board, it doesn't matter what level of the organization, whether it's a department head or an entry-level employee, public works, park services. We have lost a few pump station operators. We've lost park services personnel to neighboring cities. It has been an employee's market for some time. Now, that may change as the economy changes and you see more layoffs and things like that. That might give us a little more flexibility, but we have survived on location and reputation for a while, but that's only taken us so far. And as I mentioned to you all last month, the challenge to some degree is, the younger employee who's a PEPRA member, who doesn't have that added benefit of, okay, if I join public service and I do this for 25, 30 years, I'm going to have a nice solid pension. It's a really comfortable life in retirement, right? That isn't there now. That's not the future benefit that some of the more forward-thinking people have to look forward to. So it now is becoming a little bit more of a traditional arms race. It's a little more, hey, what does that salary look like? How am I going to get that new person in the door? So you see it. You see it maybe in the more traditional kind of administrative positions, the budget analysts, the admin analysts, the kind of entry-level accountants, those positions where if you don't pay enough and you've got, you see regular turnover and you're competing against other agencies that are paying significantly more, you're not getting the best candidates. And we're never going to get the Beverly Hills, Pasadena, Santa Monica, Thousand Oaks candidates. We don't have their revenue. We will never be, to your point, we won't compete with them in terms of salary. We just won't. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to get to median, to get to market. I honestly don't think, I hate to say it, I mean, our employees wouldn't like me here. I don't think we have to be above market. We just have to be at market, because I will say our reputation's strong, and we have some natural amenities here that others don't. So we should be mindful of that, but I don't make this recommendation lightly. I've known, I think, inherently for some time that as we were really austere post-recession in Redondo Beach with pay and benefits. You might recall we had, prior city managers, big labor disputes, right? To the point of real friction, and holding the line. We don't have the structural revenue. We can't afford to do it. Well, we've been really tight for a very long time with our employees, particularly our miscellaneous employees. We're a little bit more competitive in police and fire, particularly with our last contracts. But miscellaneous employees it's been pretty austere. And that's caught up to us. And as I look at the data, it's very clear that it's caught up to us.
We can't run the city like JetBlue or.
No, we can't. And we don't want to. We don't want to be that kind of an employer, because you get a different type of employee when you do that. So I look at it candidly as an investment. Our service, we are a people-based organization. Service is delivered by people here. Technology helps. We've leveraged technology. We're trying to do better. But when it comes down to processing a permit at the counter, or executing a project out in the field, or approaching somebody in the community who might not be following the law, it is a person delivering that service. And if they're not quality, our residents aren't going to benefit from quality service. So it's important that we're competitive. We don't need to be at the top. We really don't, but we need to be competitive.
Have you kind of, looked and at either the new roles you need to fill, or, in terms of retention, to be able to have people step up? You're putting aside $3 million, is that enough? Or is it $1 million of that you think covers you the next year or two? What's going to go to pension, and what's going to be employee
and I think that
compensation?
it'll be, I wish I knew what the 24-25 number is today. We won't know what that number is until till next October. We'll know. And we won't have that bill until the following fiscal year. I wish I had that.
Roles, and that maybe you're 10% below, can you even create a range? Is this, because again, once you hire somebody, you're kind of committed.
Right. Yeah, to put it in some perspective, a 1% across the board in terms of increased cost, increased compensation is about a $700,000 figure for us.
Okay.
Across the board. So, if you set $7 million aside, that's going to cover a 10% increase for 1 year. It ain't much.
No.
That's not lasting very long, right? So, we need the structural revenue to really sustain this. But what I'm envisioning for this fund is to, if we're showing a $1.6 million or $2 million structural deficit with the proposed budget next year, this is a place to plug that hole for a year, right? And hope.
How far does this bridge get you?
I think this bridge buys us 3 years.
Okay.
If you told me to ballpark it today, I think this bridge buys us about 3 years.
And do you think it's a good idea to put the compensation and benefit and blend it with the pension?
I do, because I think at the end of the day, it's the same.
track.
It's the same thing, right? We're gonna have either bill either way. It's really, the way to call it would be almost, call it the budget smoothing fund. It's kind of the way we've used it in the past. We called it CalPERS Reserve, and typically it never had anything to do with our future CalPERS payment. It was just, hey, we need $2.5 million to balance this year's budget. We'll get it back because we've got some additional revenue coming on in 2 years. Oh, hey, we had a great year of savings and revenues exceeded expenditures, so put $5 million back into the fund. Well, there was no synergy to that $5 million mirroring next year's UAL payment, or it was really it was really kind of a smoothing account.
Savings account.
Yeah, it's a savings account that was separate from our contingency reserve. Because don't forget, we still have another, whatever it is now, it's going up, $8.6 million set aside for the economic anomaly scenario where, oh my God, we didn't get paid by the county because of some delay, and, we need money to cover, this month's expenses. So, some people would say we're under-reserved. You could argue you'd love to have 2 months of expenditures set aside. We probably do. When you cobble together the various one-time funds and the like, I'd say we're probably at about 2.5 months of total expenses. But anyway, this is really a bit of a savings account, but I want to signal, it's important, I think, the reason I'm saying it as bluntly as I am is I want to signal to the employees that we are prepared to invest in them. Because that's important too, right? They need to know that we care. They need to know that this is coming. They're not going to know exactly what that means until we sit down and meet and confer on contracts, but it's something to say, we're investing in this way. That's why it's important, I think, to call it what I'm proposing to call it.
Thank you. The one last question I had, and you may not be able to answer this, but I'm hoping you can indulge me. Rough numbers, we had a $4 million surplus, right? We avoided a UAL payment of roughly 15 or maybe 16.
Yeah, we temporarily lowered it. It was a $15.5 million UAL payment that we decided to pay $6 million for next year on an interest-only payment to the bondholders.
Okay.
So
the question I was kind of getting to is, had we had to pay that instead, we would be looking at a deficit of, well, now you said we paid 6, so it was 10 off. So maybe a deficit of 6 or 7 million instead of a surplus of 4?
There would have, yeah. So, maybe I can answer in a couple different ways. There were a ton of one-time expenses that were layered into the budget through council action and proposals based on knowing that those proceeds were there.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have.
So again, okay.
So the question I think you're after though is where are we at structurally right now?
Or what would things look like? What would we have not been able to do? Had we not done this,
there are 120, what are there now, 120 or 122 capital projects in the CIP.
That wouldn't have.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 35 of them wouldn't even be in there right now.
Okay.
There was a bunch of one-time initiatives, studies, branding things, different one-offs, stop signs, things in maintenance budgets, little things, tree plantings, stuff that wouldn't have been funded. We just wouldn't have had the resource for it. So yeah, there's a number of things that we wouldn't have recommended or approved had we not had those one-time kind of savings proceeds from the bond.
And personnel, perhaps.
Absolutely. We were aggressive in trying to restore personnel to pre-COVID levels, in part because we knew we had a little cushion there. But I think the bigger question that is of concern is, where are we at structurally, right? And right now we adopted the budget with a little over a $2 million structural deficit, core expenses to core revenues. The reason I think we felt comfortable doing that is because we knew if nothing else changed, we were likely to see that roughly $3 million of Marine Avenue hotel funds come back our way. So I felt like, okay, we've got the one-time funds to cover it, and we've got a good eye on structural revenue coming to cover that ongoing expense in future years. So yes, we have a temporary core structural budget deficit, but the reality is if you do the 2-year forecast, we're doing okay. That doesn't leave much room, though. That doesn't leave much room for COLAs, and we're just culminating negotiations with the Police Officers Association. You talk about competitiveness for miscellaneous employees. It is a flat out arms race to hire new officers right now. It's absolutely critical. Everybody's struggling. Torrance they've got a 15% vacancy rate in their department. That's a problem. Now, they've created some problems for themselves. They've got a cultural issue. They've had some characters there that aren't helping their recruitment efforts in general based on what they've done. But bottom line is it's a struggle. And this is not an area, this is not a field you want to fall behind in, and because that snowballs in a big way. But structural budget, absent compensation for employees, I feel good about coming into balance next year, largely, naturally. I think, though, with the compensation that's going to be needed to invest in our employees, I think we're going to see some we're going to see some shortfalls and gaps come May. And I really would like to have this there available to us to kind of plug those holes for a couple of years as we get to structural balance longer term.
So assuming you have 3 years of coverage there, go over a couple more of those enhanced revenue projects. Will they be on stream at the end of 2 or 3 years?
Legato, yeah, you probably see it's coming out of the ground. You know, you're starting to see the steel posts for the hotel upgrade. But you know,
So at the end of 3 years, they should be.
they're over the hump. But are they a year away from opening? I don't know. I would think that we'll start to see revenue from Legato in 23, 24. No, 24, 25. I think we'll see sustained revenue from Legato in 24, 25.
And the Galleria?
Galleria,
They're a ways out.
they're probably sustained revenue. I think last I talked to Stuart, phase 1, which is really the interior mall renovation plus the kind of repurposing of the Nordstrom's box and that kind of, you know, filling in, pushing it out towards Artesia, kind of having that leveled face. I think they're hoping to be open in January of 25-ish, like 2 full years away, if not more.
You're also going to have some additional retail or sales tax lag in there. When I went to South Bay Social Orientation, they were talking about Kohl's being on board and Macy's being on board, but doing significant renovations that might otherwise reduce their production over the course of the next probably 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, I think we'll do a little better on the waterfront as we turn more of these leases on and we start to see some uplift there. I think Legato is real money here within the next, 2-3 years. I think potentially the cannabis retail is real money in the next 2 years. Is it to what, you see some of the big, some people estimate it's $1 million a site. I just have a hard time believing that's what it's going to be. I think it's going to be.
Impartial analysis estimated between 300 and 900,000, but that depends on what the actual tax is.
It absolutely does. We haven't formally said it yet. We still have an election, in March to go through to give us the authority to even set one.
And also how many other cities are looking at doing something similar? There's only so much demand.
There's only so much demand, but surprisingly, not as many as I thought would be. There's a chance we could actually kind of corner the South Bay market a little bit. I think that's a possibility because we're out in front of our, more established neighbors. And once we get going, it may be enough for them to just not really worry too much about it. I could just be wishful thinking, but I think that's real potential money. This short-term rental, it's going to be we're going to have a very careful discussion with the community. People have mixed feelings about opening. We have a short term, just to be clear, make sure everybody understands. You can currently, under our code, you can't rent your house out for less than 30 days. We have a VRBO, short term rental prohibition. We still have people that do that.
And via enforcement's not great.
And enforcement's not great because we don't have a lot of resources to enforce, right? City of Palm Springs is an example. They have a very specific short-term rental program. They have dedicated code enforcement officers. It's very well established. You have a lot of buy-in from the homeowners that participate in it because they don't want to lose their status because it's real money in their pockets to be renting it. So they enforce the rules with their own renters and tenants. Palm Springs, last I checked, generates over $15 million a year in TOT specific to their VRBO program. Now, it's a different market. They got a little more tolerance and capacity for it than I think our residents do, but it's real money. And if you go online today, there's probably 300 properties that are advertising short-term rentals here in town. If you run the math on just their performance over the last few years, we're $1.5 million, $2 million a year in TOT.
And the idea is to have a vendor run the enforcement for that and take us
Or at least run the monitoring. We would then dispatch code enforcement to problematic sites.
This is not the place to talk about it.
No, it's not really on the agenda, but it's future revenue.
The challenge of taking units out of inventory for long-term housing versus people who might otherwise use that as VRBO. Then you have the ADU argument and what was the real purpose of the ADUs. whether or not people are building them for family or they're building them to
Small
generate
hotels.
revenues, things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. I mean, there really is. But I mean, theoretically, if you're building an ADU because you want to turn it into a rental property, you're probably doing that on a 30-day basis anyway, right? Because you're truly trying to generate a rental property. I think the VRBO thing is unique. The reality is it's occurring in our community today. We're seeing no proceeds from it. Our hoteliers get cranky with us. They're like, why aren't you enforcing this? Why don't you have a tax? Why do we pay whatever we pay, 13%? They pay nothing. So there's an equity issue there. As one of your fiscal stewards, I'm kind of a fan of maybe exploring it because I think it could generate some money
Worth
for us.
taking a look at.
But if, as a resident who's living next door to a really popular house, I could see your concern. I fully appreciate that. I actually think through a good program, we could not only mitigate that concern, we could improve our on-site conditions today.
So I have some other questions, unless you have something else on that, Jerry. First thing I wanted to say was that the staff report and what was presented to us, the detail was incredible. And it's something that we've all talked about for a really long time, getting line items, getting detailed, really drilling down, having the opportunity at this level to go ahead and examine all of those different things. And so the report that came through, kudos to you guys. That was unbelievable.
Well, I'm glad it was helpful, for sure. I mean, it's descriptive. I'm sure there's stuff in the draft financials that we're going to want to clean up and tweak between now and final posting.
I'm
But
saying is that say more things like that.
Yeah.
Is really good.
yeah,
You did a nice job, and thanks, Commissioner Jesse, for asking about, because I see a lot of questions that come up. We don't talk about it very often enough. When you look at sales tax, no, 100% of that goes to the county, and we only receive a percentage of that, a small percentage of that. And then talking about it's based on the brick and mortar component. So that was a really nice way of breaking that down and talking about it. I was glad to have that question. Same thing, though, I want to say with property tax, where 100% of that goes to the county, and we only get a percentage of that back to us.
that one flows state, then county, then us.
Okay.
Yeah, because the
Then us.
state takes its share. As you know, the biggest chunk of property tax sweep is for education.
Right.
And each district's formula is different across the state. So the state gets it, swipes out the formula, spits back to county, county gets its share, and then we receive ours, which is 9%.
16.9.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tends to
Which is
lag
one of
a
the
little
higher.
bit.
We're one of the higher, actually, from a pro rata share. There are some cities that are really low that envy our 16.9. We're not the highest. There are some that are higher than us.
And we do get our transfer tax, which was going
do.
up also, which
Yep.
was really nice, which will likely slow down a little bit.
I think we're seeing a significant slowdown this fiscal year just due to the sales volume, as you can imagine.
Talking about our top 10 revenues, it's stated in the report that 79% of our total budget general revenue funds come from outside sources. So I would think that one of those outside sources, would that be considered our investment income? Would that be something that's an internal source? Because I don't see it here.
It's just not one of our top 10s.
Okay, it's just not one of our top 10. So what are the other sources? What are those outside sources that we're getting the other 21% from? It's just not the top 10 that are listed, or there are some other
Yeah,
other
it's a
sources.
myriad of things. Facility rentals, registration fees, class fees. A lot of our enterprise funds that have specific charges for service. Those get aggregated. The reality is, you could argue the Performing Arts Center in its heyday earns more than the parking citations does here in total, but we don't aggregate it. We don't treat it that way. We treat that as, use of facilities, and so it goes into this bigger pot. So what's missing here is largely those types of things. And those are because they're specific to use as opposed to general.
Okay, and that adds up to a little over almost $20 million a year.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah, between all of them. Yeah.
Okay, you talked about the renaming the CalPERS Reserve Fund, and then the idea you talked about of normally if we were going to take something out of a reserve fund or we were going to use one of the ISF funds, it was typically a one-time appropriation from that fund. And it sounds like that not really, but possibly this, if we did something for personnel costs, that may not be a one-time allocation. If we don't see some of those other structural revenues coming in year 2 or year 3, we might have to go back to that well again.
We would potentially have to go back to that well, or if we felt our level of optimism erode, I might be recommending structural cuts to offset some of those expenses, right? I might propose future budgets that not just allow one-time funds to patch, but we need to recalibrate our overall expenditures to match our future structural revenue. So I don't want us to have to go to that well too many years. I would prefer to kind of have a sense of it, maybe it's the next 2 to 3 years and then we're balanced. There'll be there's always new variables, and that's the beauty of our annual budgeting process. We can pivot as needed, unlike some cities who might adopt a 2-year budget or do, longer term planning. Each year is a new year, really. So for now, this would be $8 million sitting in a fund that would be unallocated until perhaps a proposal's made in May, or we just have a reality, we've got contracts that are going to come online with employee groups. They're going to increase our structural budget that we've got to find a way to balance beyond our traditional revenue sources. So, yeah.
Okay. As far as sales tax goes, I would think some of the increased sales tax would be a result of the high price of gas that we experienced. Certainly that generated a lot of additional sales tax revenue.
I think it will this fiscal year, 22, 23. It wasn't so much a factor in 21, 22.
Okay.
Yeah, the big increase, the spike occurred, I think, in our current fiscal year. We'll see that, I think, spit out at this time next year.
And then the other inflationary pressures on other cost of goods and services, we think will be reflected in the 22 numbers also.
Exactly. Yeah. And I hate to say this, maybe it's not the best thing for our sales tax in general, but for all of our residents, hopefully those are temporary.
Right.
And not sustained, right?
Some moderation in gas prices and some more moderation maybe in some of the other cost of goods.
Well, yeah, to your point, you extend that to UUT. We're spiking right now with natural gas. That we're going to see increases in our UUT as a result of that spike. But I'm not saying we're going to celebrate those increases, but that will matriculate into our budget.
Okay. So the overtime, you had mentioned in the report of personnel stands out as a category significantly exceeding the target.
Yeah, I was reading that. I think that's a little overstated. That's an edit I think I'll make. I drilled that number a little bit. It's so much better than it was 2 years ago, and it's outpacing budget a touch. But I think we are bringing that online or in line. So I don't. When I read that, that hit me a little harder than I think it probably should.
It seemed a little counterintuitive to some of the other steps that we took. So we hired in personnel for the fire department, for example, to try and mitigate some of the admin duties that sworn personnel were conducting.
And most of those changes are again matriculating into this year's fiscal year. So when you look at our big fire hiring, we did great last year. We caught up some. This year, we've just about reached full complement, and that happened really this summer. So we're going to see 22, 23. We actually shrunk overtime expense by almost $1 million year over year, 2021 to 21, 22. I expect us to come down even further in the 22, 23 fiscal year. I'm curious to see that data because I think, to your point, we are beginning to better structurally align those changes. The one thing that did occur in this budget, though, is we brought back on that constant manning requirement for the fourth person on the ladder truck. So that will increase that pressure a little bit.
We did bring back the fourth man
we
for the
did,
ladder
yeah,
truck?
that was part of the final budget adoption.
Okay.
But because our hiring's been better, I don't think we'll feel that pinch on an overtime basis as we did years ago. The other place we're seeing some overtime charges, not in the general fund, but in the Tidelands, because we're changing the way we staff those under the assessment. We're trying some new modeling, and I think it's what I'm hearing is it's been well received, but I haven't seen the data on it yet.
So if some of it gets shifted though, so if we have new positions, let's say admin staff, so some of that overtime then goes away because we have new positions within the department, but then that cost of the overtime is then just trickled into the other costs associated with new personnel, whether it be their CalPERS liabilities, their workers' comp liabilities, their actual salaries, and OPEB and other conditions of employment.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, depending on how, we haven't added to the overall complement in the budget for fire, except for that restoring that fourth person on the ladder. We've done some things administratively, right? The adjutant and then some of these other positions. Those are assignments for captains that otherwise would have been running different operations. But those individuals are still theoretically available to support unstaffed positions due to illness or vacancy or what have you. So on the whole, it shouldn't hurt overtime anymore. But to your point, it's not necessarily going to create savings either, because we've got functions that are.
I'm really happy that we're reducing our overtime.
Yeah.
But I just want to caution that those overtime expenses may be being absorbed
Could
into
be
our
shifted elsewhere.
personnel
Yeah,
costs
yeah, yeah.
elsewhere.
And ideally, we're doing both. We're shrinking our footprint and reducing overtime by just being better at hiring, by being more timely, right? And keeping, basically what we did in the police department is we started with the overhire program. We began to effectively prime the pump. We started hiring before the vacancies occurred, knowing that there's such a lag to actually put those individuals in uniform, right? Sometimes you're sending them to the academy, then you've got field training, you've got backgrounding and investigation to do before you actually bring them on and hire them under the pre-employment process. So you might extend an offer to somebody in January, they may not see the field until the following January. So we can't react to the vacancy in January and wait for them to start for a year. You've got to start the hiring a year in advance of the vacancy occurring. So we're doing better with predictive modeling, and it's helped us in POA. We're deploying the same techniques in fire.
Do you think, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Just to the point we're on, were we able to fill the crossing guard positions, or are we still paying police officers to do
We're
that?
still struggling there. We hate to put any uniformed personnel out at a crossing guard station. The contractor has not performed as well of late as we had hoped, but they have still bridged the gap for us. We extended the contract, so we have more flexibility there. So we're struggling a little bit. But the problem hasn't really gotten any worse than it was a year ago. It's kind of the same. And I think we've reduced the number of uniformed personnel to a degree, but there's still occasion somebody calls out.
And the police officers that are doing that, are they doing it as overtime, or are they?
Part of regular shift, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's taking them away from
It's
what they
taking
would
them
be
away
doing
from something
otherwise.
else. So if they're, let's say they're a motor officer, they'd be out writing tickets normally. Instead, they're staffing a
that's not so bad.
corner for an hour or two. Yeah. If they're, if they're working patrol, then, they might get stationed there for a few minutes, and then they might have to pull off. I mean, there are things that have to occur. More often than not, though, we're sending civilians, municipal services officers, just different folks, cadets, different folks that can actually do the job before we bring in sworn personnel. That's our last resort. But the contractor, I think, is performing a little bit better. Hiring's a challenge right now. It really is across all organizations.
Do you think that our examination, our report of our salaries is going to be available before our next budgeting process, so that for those vacant positions that we're seeking to hire, we budget for our vacant positions, we'll be able to budget at the higher level or anticipate that based on whatever the report comes back?
Well, so two things have to happen to effectuate a change in range. We've got to meet and confer on contracts with the bargaining association. And I think we're about to conclude POA and police management. We're not scheduled to sit down with our other employee groups until their current contracts expire in December of 23. So we're still technically about a year away from sitting down and changing compensation. There could be positions where we know we have a deficiency in recruitment, where I might make a recommendation in the budget to reclassify that position to make it more attractive for recruitment purposes. That would occur outside the bargaining. So it's possible that the data, I don't know exactly yet how the data is going to flow. If it's going to be something we share at the bargaining table, if it's something we do through closed session to prepare ourselves, if it's something we bring out as a public report. Obviously, it's eventually a public document. It's not something that eventually we're all going to see it, but The timing of it and when it's going to be completed and how we roll it out, I haven't quite fully thought out.
So that report might, and the resulting salary enhancements might trail until the 24,
Until the next
25 budget.
until the next yeah, exactly. Till we conclude the next bargaining period, and then those are flowing through into that 24, 25 budget. Yeah.
If we signed a new MOU with our police department as an example right now, something happens, I know they're talking about it, and whatever happens with that, and it dictates perhaps that we get a report back that says our salary should be X from where they are now. Is that something that we would do piecemeal, or we'd want to do everybody at once?
Well, we'll do it in time. So to answer your point, POA, if we conclude that, there's going to be a staff report to approve that updated MOU, and there's going to be a cost associated with that for the balance of this fiscal year, and then there's going to be an annualized cost associated with the terms of that agreement that are going to have to be baked into future core budgets. Depending on, so two things occur, right? The timing, let's say theoretically that we get this thing done and we have an MOU ready for next Tuesday's council meeting, right? We've got 5 months left in the fiscal year, right? There's going to be a cost for those 5 months. I will look at the budget, or have staff look at the budget. Do we have enough projected savings in the department's current sort of performance to absorb those increases, or are we going to need to appropriate additional funds to cover them? Typically, when you adopt an MOU this late in the year, especially with PD where you have enough vacancies and you look at the actual metrics, as an example, we saved a little over $1 million this last fiscal year, and we were pretty well staffed up. We probably won't need a supplemental appropriation, but whatever the cost of that contract is on an annualized basis, let's say it's $1 million, that's going to have to be built into the structural budget in 23, 24 to accommodate that contract. But the next groups would come online as we negotiate those agreements next December, January, and then they would flow through probably in 24, 25.
So I'm going to circle back then, looking at this as a staggered process, going back to the suggestion that the $3 million be moved into what we are calling now the CalPERS reserve. Right. Part of that might be used if and would a new agreement with the POA, a new MOU with the POA takes place. They being the council, may wish to go ahead and allocate some of this unallocated general fund balance right now to that 5-month stretch.
They could if we needed it, or at least it gives comfort knowing we've got it there if we've got a shortfall as we go into the budget season in May.
And would you want to hold that back from the reserve fund, or it wouldn't really matter because you could still draw upon the reserve
It's
fund?
the same. I mean, based on the mechanics of how it's set aside now, putting it in an aggregated account does not change its flexibility. We would still, if we wanted to appropriate it the way it's structured now into the current year budget, we would need a 4/5 budget resolution.
Right.
If we want to build it into the proposed message and budget next fiscal year, my recommendation would be take $1 million out of that fund to provide balance.
And that's a decision package as part of the budget adoption and a 3-2 vote.
Precisely.
Okay. One last question, if I can, please. Thank everybody for their indulgence. The city council has an audit committee. So do they go through all this stuff that we're going through here and make recommendations to council also?
They will when we get ready to do the ACFR. They don't typically for the designations.
How often do they meet?
I think it's twice a year. I think it's CAFR and budget.
So council audit committee meets twice a year.
Yeah, I think that's right. I could be off on that.
And they review the CAFR.
They review the CAFR and then they view, and the audit report, the annual audit.
LSL audit report?
Yeah, the audit also is part of that review.
Okay.
How is that audit committee assembled?
They make those assignments when they do their other committee assignments at each year. It's kind of volunteer, kind of designee.
Somebody volunteers to be on the audit committee to look at the auditing report and the annual CAFR.
Yeah, and typically it also includes the clerk and the treasurer's office and then, our finance team.
I misspoke. I have one more question then.
Yeah.
Some of this was use of the treasurer's department, use of contracts auditing remained unspent. Is that Moss Adams or is that a different auditing expense?
I think that was Moss Adams perhaps.
Okay, because our contract with Moss Adams ended, right?
Yeah, but I think we put it back in the budget.
I saw it listed in there, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. It'd be nice to have Moss Adams continuing
and-
along. I
and-
think they provide a really key resource
Yeah.
to not just us, but the city.
Yeah, I think our intention, I mean, we restored the funding this year for that annual process. I think we are, if we get to it, we're going to reboot that agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Great detail again.
No, I'm happy to hear it.
One additional question. We're concerned about revenue increases and cost decreases. Somewhere, I think they're still wondering around an analysis of the fire department, whether it should go to the county.
Yeah.
Where does that stand now?
Yeah, we're going to bring that to you. You're the next stop, to be honest. We received their figures for cost. This year, what's different is they actually provided an apples to apples quote, meaning same level of service as opposed to, reducing the number of engines or companies that in the model they traditionally deploy. So we have both now. The city council has a subcommittee that's been looking at those. Their last direction was, hey, we all talked about it. It was like, hey, let's have the Budget Finance Commission kind of chew on this a little bit as the next step, and kind of go through the details a little bit. So everybody understands kind of the pros and cons of at least the financing piece of it. So I was hopeful we would have this wrapped up and the ACFA wrapped up, and we'd have a chance to maybe do it at your March meeting. But I'm still hoping for March. But I don't know if the ACFA is going to be, we may be doing ACFA in March. That's the only problem. So, and if that's the case, we'll do it in April.
Okay, thanks.
While you're onboarding a new finance director.
Yeah. We'll send her out here. It'll be no problem. Yeah. So it's a lot. There's a lot. I wish, we're all frustrated by the timing of this. I really do. I am starting to fully appreciate the GASB 87 impact. It's the reason it's jamming us up is because the auditors are jammed up, and it's like, everybody's just spinning, everybody, and you can't until they flow that new impact through. It affects it not in a big dollar way, but it's in small dollar ways. It's going to affect all of our entries, and so it flows through the entire document. So you really can't even edit the final draft until that flow through is done. So we're close. Tentatively right now, I think worst case scenario, we're targeting the first meeting in March for the council to approve the ACFA, which means I'd like to sit all with you before that. So the first meeting in March is March 14th. So your regular, second Thursday March meeting could be when we do the ACFA with you. If we get it done earlier, there's a small chance we could take it to the council on February 28th. We may need to have a special meeting, a second meeting with you in February, perhaps, to review it before we take it to them. I really want us to maintain discipline and talking to you all before we get to council. Doesn't work as well backwards.
And if we do that, how are we going to get our thoughts and recommendations to council for the meeting? That
Same thing. You would either discuss them and synthesize them here through a motion, or you would choose to write a letter, any way you would normally would. Typically, I'm able to kind of summarize what I hear from you all and communicate that in the staff report. And then if you have specific things that you want to put in your own language, you would do that through a letter.
if we were to assemble a letter, because I've seen it go different ways. I've seen it in my time as chair where we did a letter and it went to them, but it wasn't a part of their agenda or wasn't part of a blue folder or anything. So it's like, well, maybe some of them
they all
read
did.
it, maybe some of them didn't.
Yeah, I think they get. I think they read it. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
what we try to do is, in an ideal world, right? Minutes are available, and we just attach minutes, and they're part of the record, and that's never
not gonna
it's never the
happen,
case,
yeah.
right? So what's even better is you're able to synthesize a very clear motion, right? That is dictated, and I just put that in our staff report, so it's very clear. It's memorialized there. The alternative sometimes is you all give kind of general feedback, and then you either nominate somebody from the commission to draft the letter and then circulate it to the chair for kind of execution, or we take that charge, take initial cut at the draft, circulate it to the chair for final editing on behalf of the commission, then have it signed and then extended to the council. Whatever letter or recommendation or form of that you provide, I will ensure is part of the packet. Now, if you have something if you had some really unique recommendations tonight that were very elaborate, it would probably need to be a letter that you would pen, and then we would get it into the packet as late as next Tuesday. My intention is to take this to council on February 7th, so a week from tonight.
I appreciate that, because there was even a time where I was told, again, as chair, that, oh, well, if you want to make sure that city council hears what we as a commission felt about something, that I should call in and
Call in
tell
or
them.
show up, yeah, that you could.
Or show up. Well, this
that's
is like COVID
yeah.
time, so it was call in. And I just feel that if we're important enough to be a commission and our role is to, help and benefit council, that there's a clear channel for getting that information to them in time.
Absolutely. And look, I think part of it starts with making sure that we're getting to you ahead of the meeting first, right? And that you're having a chance to weigh in before the council deliberates. It's my charge through my staff to make sure your input is collected, accurately depicted, and shared. I like to do that through, the staff report that Lori's going to transmit to council next week's going to have a little couple of sentences, depending on what you all want to advise, it's going to describe that. It's at least summarize it from our perspective. And then from there, if there was a letter or something else, we would attach it to the document. If in an ideal world, not that this happens sometimes, if you concur with staff's recommendations, it's really easy to put in the staff report. Commission is very supportive of whatever was recommended at the time. So those are the easy times. But I promise you, whatever you want to share with council, I will make sure is included in our materials.
Thank you.
I can't promise you they'll read it. I can't go that far. I can promise you that I'll tell them it's there. But yeah, it's important. That's why we're here. That's why I enjoy my time with you all.
I'd say the only issue that I would have over the new name for the CalPERS Reserve Fund, I would not quibble with the idea of calling it a reserve fund, but I think that calling it an employee compensation benefit infers that that's what it's there for rather than as a reserve fund. And I don't know that that's really the purpose of that fund. That's what the purpose of the general fund is for employee compensation. It might be a small thing, but I think it sends, and I understand the importance of the message. I very much do that. But I think that we have rather sophisticated union representation within the city amongst our various groups, and that they will recognize that hey, this money has been allocated towards this reserve fund, and it can be used to help us bridge personnel cost increases. Would somebody say, well, it's called an employee compensation fund, so let's use it for all of that? No, I don't think so, but messaging is important, I think.
Sure. No, appreciate that perspective, absolutely. Any suggested edits to the title?
I would have it.
You could drop compensation, just play, it could be employee.
I would call it compensation. You could call it compensation and pension reserve fund, but that's the same issue. So I would rather call it just pension reserve fund. Because it's not really for, what is partially for CalPERS now, but.
Yeah, CalPERS is, to me, really is outdated. I mean, theoretically now, since we have we have debt financing as well. But yeah, I mean, the semantic there, right, is what is the, what I'm trying to do is make sure I'm signaling to you all in the community that in May, hypothetically, if we've got a little shortfall and I'm proposing pulling it out of this fund, it's not, oh my gosh, that's only there, under all circumstances for a supplemental UAL payment, right? And I'm trying to signal and be as transparent to you all as I can that, so you're not surprised, if and when that occurs.
We haven't been shy about using one-time appropriations from a variety of our different funds, whether it be the vehicle replacement fund, whether it be the self-insurance fund or whatever it is, to help for one-time appropriations and cover personnel costs, bonuses, and other payments that we've made during our budgeting process.
Yeah.
I understand the importance of it, but also don't want to say, because it's called this, well, then, yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's going to require some judicious, use and oversight of it. We don't want it to just be perceived as, I'm looking up what we're calling our other.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure that I would agree that the CalPERS designation is outdated. The key thing that is going to be a variable that we're going to have to come up with money is CalPERS. To the extent that it's employee compensation or used for compensation, that can be adjusted. You can't get away from the CalPERS issue. If we don't perform, if CalPERS doesn't perform, or if we increase benefits and don't fund it, CalPERS is the one dead certainty that we've got to pay. So I think you keep CalPERS in. I wouldn't be opposed to calling it compensation or some combination of employee compensation / CalPERS, but I would definitely keep CalPERS in the title.
As opposed to pension. The only reason I think pension, not everybody understands what CalPERS is. You're sophisticated, CalPERS. Does the public understand what CalPERS is as opposed to the phrase pension?
Yeah. Well, I hope that by now they do.
I'm sure they do now better than they did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But
But the point is, it's going to be an ongoing issue. It's not going to go away.
True.
There are going to be 2 or 3 years in a row when CalPERS underperforms, and then we gulp and we have to come up with
We've got checks to write.
$15 million extra to pay for it.
That's right.
So
And we don't want to
I'd
carry
like to
those
see,
balances forward.
I'd like to keep that name in front of the public and in front of the city council so that they know it's a CalPERS liability.
Okay, fair point.
Also, the concern is if we're setting aside money from, say, a one-time surplus towards expenses that are going to be regular and ongoing, then we run the risk of, continuing to have to erode whatever we have in that reserve.
We have to recognize that is stopgap. It's not, we can't structurally depend on it. But it's there. The goal here is to make sure that people understand that it's there to be flexible to help us through those harder times or those transition years. And there's a lot of ways to creatively do that, of course, but that's what I'm trying to signal here. So we're not shocked. But yeah, it's a kind of a wordful title. It's kind of a catch-all the way it's written now. But the employee is the first word there. CalPERS is really about employees too, past and present. So that they're related in that sense.
And it would be redundant to say something like the CalPERS Employee Pension Reserve Fund. So I think maybe striking some sort of a compromise, maybe if we called it the CalPERS and Employee Compensation Benefit Reserve Fund.
Yeah, to the extent
Those two titles.
if we want to overemphasize employee compensation, we could mention that first. So we could put, I just think CalPERS should be in the title somewhere. I don't know where.
Just feels like the idea, if you call it Employee Compensation Fund, it makes it seem more solicitous that we're expecting monies to come from this fund to help pay compensation, not just this year or next year, but in future years.
You say something about a bridge or a one-time or try to create a short-term.
I don't want to create that impression.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, well, we could open with Cal. Well, in a sense, you could make the case that maybe it's easier to transition because this is an old title. Maybe for tracking purposes, it's better to keep CalPERS in there as well. To say CalPERS, maybe it's CalPERS Pension and Employee Compensation and Benefit Reserve Fund.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Rolls off the tongue.
And then we can come up with an acronym for it.
Yeah, the acronym is real easy.
We're going to have to.
And do we
we're
use
gonna have to
all
get
of the
an
letters
acronym
in
for that.
CalPERS as part of the acronym?
Let's do the acronym first.
Well, he could create it like an anagram.
Compensation and Benefit Reserve Fund. All right, so one more time. CalPERS Pension and Employee Compensation and Benefit Reserve Fund.
Sure.
We all live with that?
Yep.
Sure.
I think that's cool.
Commission.
All right. I'll even change my recommendation to council next week. Look, you guys have convinced me. Commission has convinced me.
Well, other than that, I would make a motion to adopt the staff recommendations as presented to us, accepting the name change to the future named fund.
I second. I think it's,
Wait,
I agree with it.
I had one other small thing for Mike.
Yeah.
When we were looking at filling new positions or refilling positions, I recall one of the positions being like a grant facilitator or somebody to focus on getting grants for the city.
Wasn't a position. We ended up contracting. We have a consultant.
Okay, we contracted for it.
And they are on board.
So they've been in position and they've been doing their thing. So my question to you is, how is that working out?
It's great. They've identified a number of targets. We have been very careful, though, yet to deploy them. So we are assessing kind of the priority opportunities and reconciling that against highest propensity for success, where we can't do it on our own, right? We actually do a really good job getting, in fact, I just spent all day in Sacramento yesterday chasing down funding. A lot of our employees, particularly in public works, you've heard me say this before, working Metro, working our regional partners to chase down funding. I don't necessarily want us to spend our money on our expensive consultants to do things that we can do probably as well, right? We want to use them for those more complex and maybe tangential and esoteric grants that we haven't had a lot of success pursuing or haven't even tried to pursue in the past because they've got federal strings that we don't fully understand or state mandates that we don't fully understand. So we're trying to figure out how we want to best deploy them. They're under contract. They've been out scouring for us. We've met with them. They understand our needs. And we're just about ready to kind of fit the matrix together to go, okay, go on these top handful of projects.
So far, they've been able to execute on what they've been able to do what they say they can do.
Yes, everything, their deliverables are on schedule right now. Yeah, it's really just a matter of us saying, that's how we best want to use you. And things have evolved because the climate resiliency plan has become a precursor to a lot of the federal infrastructure spending. And we're going to be better positioned to pursue that funding once we have that plan in place, or at least are closing in on that plan. So we may be premature in some cases to launch our consultants to go tack things when we don't necessarily have our full ducks in a row. So that's part of their support and assistance has been helping us identify, hey, these precursors will help you. There's money now to go out and pay for that plan development. In fact, you might recall if you saw, we just approved kind of an emergency action for the demolition of the sport fishing pier. In that action, there was a series of budget recommendations to transfer funds from existing CIPs, particularly in the Harbor Tidelands area, in part because we've identified now other people's monies, external sources of funds to supplement or cover those costs. And climate resiliency plan is another step in that process. Once we get that done, it opens new doors federally, at least with this current administration.
Thank you for that update, Mike.
Would we be able to, so when Galleria comes online and the 300 apartments are built and we get a $7.5 million credit to our Quimby funds, is that a place, I know the Quimby fees are generally spent within the regionalized area in which the impact fees are collected. But for some of the capital improvement projects that are being carried over, is there a scenario where maybe we paid for those items out of the Quimby if it's a locus to where the Quimby was received rather than a capital improvement fund?
Sure. And many of our projects fall under a regional argument, right? We only have one tennis center. We only have one performing arts center. We only have one track and field, right? So even though that may not be in the immediate neighborhood, because it's a regional amenity, Quimby fees can be spent on that because it serves all of our residents.
Oh, we're building a pickleball park.
Right. Theoretically, a pickleball facility would be an eligible use of funds from Quimby, right? Because we don't have pickleball facility, right? So now if we had made it a point to have a pickleball court in every district, then you might
be at the park.
Yeah, you have to synergize it a little bit, but no, that absolutely. Usually we don't, but for the small parquettes we pretty much, all of our park developments, you could make the regional argument for, because they're just, we're just not that big.
Maybe that's when it gets built, when we get the 7.5 million from the South Bay Social.
Yeah, well, it's a big number there. So, but we won't see that till vertical construction. So we're a ways away. We did get our legato check though.
We got that. Was that 3 million?
No, because it predated the
That was for
$25,000.
7,500
Yeah,
apiece.
Yeah, it was almost 900,000, I think.
Still nice.
Still big money.
Mr. Solomon, you want to reissue your recommendation?
So I'll make a motion to adopt staff recommendations for item J1, accepting the change in the name of the currently titled CalPERS Reserve Fund.
Yeah, formerly known as CalPERS, yeah.
Need a second?
I'll second.
And can we do a roll call vote?
We have public comment at all?
Oh, sorry.
Let's see, no one on Zoom and no e-comments. So Commissioner Conroy,
Aye.
Commissioner Jesse,
Aye.
Commissioner Castle,
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham,
Aye.
Commissioner Samples absent, and Commissioner Solomon,
Aye.
and Chair Maron.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Rozansky.
Hey, thank you all.
very
Always
much.
appreciate your time. Thanks for getting together on a special meeting. Hopefully, we won't have to do it again in February, but we might. So stand by. Doug will be in touch. Doug sends his requests. He had a bit of a family emergency tonight, so he's been doing a nice job though, providing liaisonship for you all. So appreciate that.
100%.
But if you have members and or referrals, I can handle them tonight for you. I'm not going to leave till you all do. So.
I have a request, but we'll go in order.
I just want to echo Commissioner Solomon's comments about the information we've been getting has been, in my opinion, well detailed, also digestible, understandable. Descriptions are good, and in addition to the written reports we're getting, you being here and answering our questions, I'm just really pleased with your efforts and the city manager's office and the finance department office. So thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
Commissioner Justy, any comments?
I agree. I think your being here today and explaining all these minute details certainly very enlightening and very helpful. Appreciate it.
Happy to do so.
And I would agree with their statements. Again, this is my first time going through this process. So, receiving the information and the details, I was able to go through it, but then your explanations were very helpful and insightful. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, looking at that variance analysis first time, it's a lot going on there.
I could tell some things were going on.
Yeah, it's a wonky year. Yeah.
But it sort of made sense.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Commissioner Woodham?
Yeah, just to restate my earlier question about the history of the unfunded liability account, and I think something like that to staff. And I think we could, a 1 or 2 page summary of that showing the amount by year is adequate. Do we just need to keep some record of how the amount that developed and basic reasons why it developed?
Yep, we'll get a future item for you on that.
When we had our discussion about our investment policies, we noticed that the city treasurer's office is responsible for disseminating monthly investment reports to the city council. And we had asked if we could receive those also, which I'd like to have a discussion about that, a formal agenda discussion so that we could submit a formal request to the city treasurer to receive copies that are going out to the city council of the monthly investment reports, or have them available either on an agenda as an ongoing item.
Yeah,
Just
I think
so that would help us, I think, prepare for the quarterly reports that we get from the treasurer's office.
Monthly investment reports. I'm not sure what form they're being transmitted in today, but if it's something that's relatively easy to collect and aggregate for you, I don't see why we couldn't, find a way to put that into your regular monthly packet here. So If nothing else is a consent calendar, FYI, maybe there's not much of a description, it's just an attachment, but
They're currently disseminated via email to the council members, so I would think that would be an easy.
yeah,
an easy
but
thing.
I'll talk to Doug, see if we can wrestle that up. And no reason why, I can't see a reason why we couldn't collect that for you and make it easy for you as part of your packet.
That's great, thank you.
CC us on the report, it'd be fine.
It doesn't have to be agenda.
Well,
If it's on the consent calendar, I think we would get it once a month. I think that would work.
yeah, that's one way to do it. I mean, I could have Doug, I would rather not cross-pollinate the email distribution between the two bodies. But I mean, theoretically, I could see if Doug could be CC'd on that, and then he could separately transmit that to you as blind copy. So you don't, of course, we're always careful with mass emails to not elicit a group conversation. So either that, or we could do a hard copy on the monthly report.
I mean, other things we get blind copy.
Yeah, it's what we would do. We'd do a blind copy. So, yeah, I mean, I'll talk to Doug about it when he's back, and we can see if we
That's great.
can
Thank
sort
you.
something out. Yep.
Thank you for sitting in, Melissa.
All right, thank you. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Hey, Mike, we really appreciate the kind of presentations you give and the kind of firsthand knowledge you bring of these issues. It's helpful to us.
Well, I'm happy. I'm glad,